still an emergency. Through my jeans, foot cut on my clocks look dirty.
My personal view is that we are treading dangerously by adopting the approach of declaring a state of emergency, certainly over the area that I am Member of Parliament of. Why do I say this? As has already been pointed out, the state of emergency is really the last resort that the state has to dealing with a crisis situation that is beyond the norm and has arisen and threatens the very existence of the state.
A state of emergency which requires that we be satisfied that action has been taken or is immediately threatened by any person or body of persons of such a nature and on so extensive a scale as to be likely to endanger the public safety. What you have told us today, Prime Minister, doesn't seem to accord with that wording of our Constitution. And I think we are running the risk of confusing correlation with causation. Why do I say that? We may assume just because we have had a state of emergency running that that is the cause of the reduction in murders, which we welcome. But I would make an alternative suggestion, and it is the saturation level of policing that has taken place in St. James primarily, and to a lesser extent in St. Catherine North and in South St. Andrew, that has caused this reduction. When you look at the thousands of persons detained relative to those charged, probably 10% of those detained ultimately end up being charged, and probably only one of those 10% are charged for very serious offenses like murder and shooting. So the ratio between persons detained and persons who are charged for serious offenses is really very low. The other thing is, there may be what you might describe as some sort of shock effect or shock and awe of the declaration of the state of emergency, that people just hearing about it, it has an intimidating effect. The problem is, the more it becomes routine, then the less of that effect that will be there. Now, we all welcome the reduction in murders and shootings. But remember, this is a reduction relative to 2017, which was the third highest year in our history. This year is still, if you take out 2017, is still the highest year since 2010 for murders, for shootings. It is still much higher than 2015, Prime Minister, when you were very anxious and going up and down on platforms all over promising people that they would be able to sleep with their windows and doors open. This year, with all these states of emergency, it is still higher than 2015, which was the highest year, and much higher than 2014, which was when we did 1,005. So I really want to caution, Prime Minister, let us not assume that everything, all the reduction we have seen, is because of the state of emergency. I'm going to suggest that it's just as plausible that is the saturation level of police and military personnel that we have on the ground in these areas that's causing it, and that it is not necessary to suspend the human rights of the residents in these areas beyond the lower levels that had been anticipated and prescribed when we passed the ZOSA legislation.
I would argue that the state of emergency is really just a mere plaster bandage over a wound that will not heal without the proper treatment. And the treatment that is needed is social investment to address the fundamental causes of crime and violence that have become endemic in these communities. Early childhood development and nutrition, strengthening parenting and family life, civic training in school, and a national program for remediation, training and job placements for youths who leave school with no subjects, no jobs and no prospects.
The question is, when you use this now on a sustained basis, is it the best and most efficient use of the resources that you have? When you look at St. Catherine North, for example, over a 6-month period, 494,000, just under 500,000 persons searched, 24,000 vehicles searched, relatively few persons arrested and charged. And when you look at the charges, the persons charged, in the majority of cases, it is for relatively minor offenses. Can we sustain this inefficient use over a long period of time? Now, if all these searches, for example, were resulting in increases in the recovery of firearms and ammunition, then we could say it is justified. But when we look at this year, the figures for this year versus last year at the same time, total weapons seized, including rifles, SMGs, shotguns, homemade pistols and revolver, is 547 this year versus 650 last year at the same time. When you look at the ammunition seized, it has fallen even more dramatically. Last year at this time, we had just about 15,000 rounds of ammunition seized. This year, we are down to 8,400.
I will not respond to the academic points raised by the member from Central Manchester in my response, but at a later date, because it does deserve some analysis.